So, what if you found out that one of the most foundational texts of modern political philosophy, a book that's almost universally associated with absolute unquestionable authority, secretly argued that patriarchal control is just a total myth?
Yeah, it's wild. It completely forces a reevaluation of how we understand the whole um, intellectual history of power.
Right. Like, what if the very architecture of male dominance that we assume is just rooted in nature was actually described by the ultimate authoritarian thinker as nothing more than an artificial human construct?
Because when you actually read the fine print of these foundational texts, I mean, the philosophical landscape just looks radically different than the standard historical narrative suggests.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are exploring an automated transcript of a public domain audiobook, specifically Thomas Hobbes' 1651 masterpiece, Leviathan.
And we're really zeroing in on chapter 20 here.
Yeah, chapter 20. Now, for anyone who follows political philosophy, you already know Hobbes, right? He's the architect of the social contract, the guy who advocates for the absolute power of the sovereign.
Right, the Leviathan itself.
Exactly. But our focus today is on something much more subversive that's kind of hidden within those pages.
Yeah, we're looking at his specific theories on what he calls dominion, paternal, and despotical.
Dominion, paternal, and despotical.
Right. And this is where Hobbes lays out his arguments on the natural dominion of the mother over her children, and he basically systematically dismantles the myth of natural male superiority.
It's so surprising. And to understand why his view of the family is so shocking, for a text published in, 1651, we have to start where Hobbes always starts.
The condition of mere nature.
Yes. We all know the famous Hobbesian state of nature, right? No laws, no government, just a war of all against all where life is nasty, brutish, and short.
The classic Hobbes quote.
Exactly. But we rarely talk about how gender actually functions in that theoretical chaos.
Right, because in that raw state, humanity is stripped of every single civil institution. I mean, there's no society.
None at all.
So if you want to identify what authority is truly natural, you have to imagine humanity before a single law was ever written.
Right.
And in that environment, Hobbes explicitly rejects the prevailing 17th century belief that men naturally hold dominion just because they are supposedly the, quote, more excellent sex.
Okay, let's unpack this, because he literally writes that those who believe in natural male superiority misreckon it. He states that the math just simply doesn't add up.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that his reasoning isn't based on some early version of, like, moral egalitarianism.
No, not at all.
It's entirely pragmatic. It's based strictly on physical and mental capacity.
Yeah.
He assesses the baseline capabilities of human beings.
Right, because Hobbes argues that in the state of nature, the differences in strength or prudence between a man and a woman are simply not significant enough to automatically determine who has the right to rule.
Exactly. And prudence, in Hobbes' vocabulary, is essentially experience. And he notes that time bestows experience equally on all people who apply themselves to a task.
Right, it's like putting two equally matched survivalists in a forest. I mean, one doesn't automatically get to be the boss just because of their gender.
Yeah, they are both exceptionally dangerous. Neither has a decisive, overwhelming advantage that just compels the other to submit without a fight.
Wait, so a 17th century thinker is arguing against natural male supremacy and saying men and women are equally matched threats? That's just crazy to think about for the time.
It really is. I mean, Hobbes points out elsewhere in Leviathan that even the weakest individual has the capacity to kill the strongest.
Wow.
Yeah, either through secret machinations or, by forming alliances with others. The vulnerability of the human body makes everyone a lethal threat to everyone else.
So nobody is safe.
Nobody. When a man and a woman meet in the state of nature, they meet as two highly capable, equally dangerous entities.
Which means the traditional argument, that men are just naturally stronger and therefore naturally in charge, it totally fails Hobbes's most basic test of logic.
Right. He just doesn't see a biological gap wide enough to establish a natural hierarchy.
Yeah. But he does acknowledge the biological reality that God ordained two parents for a child, right?
Yes. And by that logic, dominion over that child should theoretically belong equally to both the mother and the father.
But Hobbes is obsessed with sovereignty and preventing conflict.
Exactly. Having two absolute rulers over one subject, the child, completely violates his core political philosophy. He applies his famous axiom, no man can obey two masters.
Right, because an equal division of power creates fractured sovereignty.
And that inevitably leads back to the state of war. A family with two equal heads is basically just a localized civil war waiting to happen. So the controversy over who commands the child just has to be settled.
But he insists that nature absolutely does not hand that default tie-breaking authority to the man. Biology provides no mechanism to resolve the dispute.
Right. If nature leaves them entirely equal, the authority has to come from somewhere else entirely. It must be established by some form of action or agreement, rather than just an inherent biological trait.
So this pushes Hobbes to search for the true origin of dominion in a world totally devoid of marriage certificates or
Yeah,
courts.
which leads directly to his really shocking conclusion about where power actually originates.
Right. Because if we are in the condition of mere nature, matrimonial laws do not exist. There are no legally recognized families.
None. So Hobbes concludes it's impossible to know who the father of a child is unless the mother explicitly declares it.
That's a massive point. Paternity, in the absence of civil surveillance or legal structure, is entirely a matter of the mother's testimony.
Yeah, exactly. The father has no independent, verifiable claim to the child.
That biological and situational reality gives the mother an undeniable upper hand. The right of dominion over the newly born child depends entirely on her will.
But he takes it even further into the physical realm.
Oh, yeah. The infant is entirely in the mother's immediate physical power the exact moment it's born.
Yeah, Hobbes focuses on the brutal mechanics of survival here. The mother is faced with a stark choice regarding this new life. She has the choice to either nourish or expose it.
Nourish or expose, meaning she can provide the sustenance required for the infant to survive, or she can just abandon it to the elements in this unforgiving state of nature.
Right. And if she chooses to nourish it, the child owes its continued existence to her and is therefore obliged to obey her.
Because for Hobbes, dominion isn't derived from the act of giving birth, is it?
No, not at all. It's derived from the ongoing act of preservation. Preservation is the fundamental engine of all authority in Hobbes's entire philosophical system.
Power rightfully belongs to the entity that keeps you from dying.
Exactly.
And he drives this point home by stating that if a mother does choose to expose her child, and, say, a passing stranger finds that infant and nourishes it, the absolute dominion transfers immediately to the rescuer.
The biological mother loses all claim, and the preserver gains absolute authority.
Which means it has absolutely nothing to do with bloodlines or genetics. It has everything to do with who physically secures your survival against the constant threat of death.
Yeah, it completely strips away centuries of sentimentality surrounding the family unit. I mean, Hobbes treats the family not as a divine institution, but as a microscopic commonwealth, forged in the crucible of survival.
Okay, so what does this all mean for his broader concept of consent? Because Hobbes bases his entire political philosophy on the idea of covenants and contracts, right?
Right.
But, I mean, an infant cannot verbalize agreement. How can a newborn infant actually consent to being ruled by its mother? An infant can't sign a social contract to obey its mom in exchange for breast milk.
This raises an important question about how Hobbes defines the mechanics of submission. He doesn't view consent merely as a formal, written agreement.
Okay.
He views the acceptance of a life-saving benefit as the ultimate binding covenant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the dynamic between the parent and the child is fundamentally identical to the dynamic between a victor and a vanquished enemy on a battlefield.
Wait, you are saying he equates a mother holding a newborn to a conquering general holding a sword to the throat of a defeated soldier?
Within his logical framework,
Yes.
the mechanism of power is identical. Hobbes calls this despotical dominion, which comes from the Greek word for master.
Right.
So when an individual is completely at the mercy of someone who possesses the immediate power to destroy them, and that powerful figure chooses to grant life instead of death, a contract is instantly formed.
The vanquished soldier promises obedience in exchange for their life.
Exactly. And the infant, by accepting nourishment and continuing to breathe, is engaging in a silent biological covenant of obedience.
So the child's subjugation is the assumed inescapable price of not being destroyed.
Yeah, because every human action, according to Hobbes, is driven by the fundamental desire for self-preservation.
Right.
So when someone preserves you, when they could effortlessly let you perish, you become inextricably bound to them. In those crucial first moments of life, in a state of nature, the mother is the sole arbiter of life and death.
She is the original sovereign.
She really is.
It is a staggering argument. He takes the exact same cold, calculated logic of power and survival that he applies to kings and nations and maps it perfectly onto a mother and a newborn.
Yeah, and by refusing to carve out a sentimental exception for the family, he builds an incredibly robust, logically sound argument against natural male dominance. The consistency is absolute.
If authority comes from the power to preserve life, then the mother's original dominion is the only mathematically correct conclusion in the state of nature.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a massive, glaring historical contradiction.
Right, the obvious question.
Right. If mothers hold the original, absolute, natural dominion over children, if they are the ultimate biological starting point for all human sovereignty, how on earth did we arrive at the patriarchal reality of the 17th century?
Or any century, really.
Yeah. How did humanity transition from a theoretical matriarchy in the forest to a society where women were systemically excluded from political and economic power?
Well, Hobbes addresses this transition directly, and his explanation strips the patriarchal order of any divine or natural justification whatsoever.
He argues that patriarchal control is entirely artificial.
Completely.
Once human beings decide to leave the state of nature and form commonwealths to protect themselves, they establish civil laws.
Right.
And from that moment on, controversies over who rules the family are decided by those civil laws, not by natural right.
The state of nature is superseded by the legal architecture of the Commonwealth. The civil law basically becomes the new operating system for society.
And Hobbes explicitly notes that the civil law almost always decides in favor of the father for one very specific reason.
Right, because commonwealths and laws were historically erected by fathers, not mothers.
The architects of the Civil Code drafted the rules to consolidate their own authority. It's like sitting down to play a game of Monopoly, but the other player arrived an hour early, rewrote the rule book, and decided they start the game owning all the properties.
That's a perfect analogy.
You aren't losing because they are naturally better at the game. You are losing because the legal construct of the game was rigged before you even rolled the dice.
Right. Hobbes is looking at the male-dominated society around him and basically saying men are in charge because they formed the governments and codified their own power into law, not because nature dictated it.
He demystifies the entire structure.
He really does. The patriarchal order is not a reflection of God's will or some biological destiny. It is simply a legacy of contract law written by the victors of early societal formation.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. To prove that dominion passes by legal contract and not by gender, Hobbes deploys some fascinating historical and hypothetical examples.
Right. He doesn't just leave it as an abstract theory.
No, he brings up the Amazons.
The society of warrior women from classical antiquity, they serve as the perfect stress test for his theory.
He points out that, according to the histories, the Amazons managed reproduction by contracting with men from neighboring countries.
Right.
When the children were born, the Amazons sent the male children back to the father's countries, but kept the female children to raise themselves.
Yeah.
And Hobbes uses this specific arrangement to prove his core thesis. The mother holds the absolute original dominion, and she has the authority to contractually decide the fate of her offspring.
Right, because if patriarchy were a binding natural law, a society like the Amazons would be a philosophical impossibility. Nature would theoretically compel the women to submit to the men they interacted with.
But because authority is determined entirely by power and contract, a society composed entirely of women can wield sovereign dominion just as effectively as any male-led commonwealth.
Exactly. The power dynamic is dictated by the terms of the agreement, independent of biology. Hobbes uses the Amazon example to illustrate that humans can engineer any societal structure they choose, provided they have the power to enforce the contracts.
That is fascinating. And then he follows that up with an example that would have been highly relevant to his European readers.
Oh, the Queen example.
Right. He examines the legal reality of a sovereign queen marrying one of her own subjects.
Which is a situation completely fraught with potential conflicts over authority, especially in a heavily patriarchal culture.
But Hobbes cuts right through the cultural noise. He states that if a ruling queen marries a subject, the resulting child is subject to the mother, not the father.
Right. And why? Because the father is her subject.
Exactly. The act of marriage does not magically transfer the supreme power of the Commonwealth to the husband just because he has a Y chromosome.
The sovereign power remains entirely with the queen. Her authority as the monarch supersedes any traditional domestic expectations.
So the child is born into a commonwealth where the mother wields the ultimate sword. Therefore, the child's obedience is owed to the mother, both as a parent and as the sovereign.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, you see Hobbes systematically dismantling the arguments of his contemporaries.
Yeah.
I mean, thinkers like Sir Robert Filmer were arguing for the divine right of kings based on the supposed natural paternal authority of Adam over his children.
Right.
And Hobbes looks at that entire intellectual tradition and basically categorizes it as a fiction.
He observes the patriarchal reality of 17th century Europe and essentially says, yes, this is the system we currently live under, but it is a constructed system.
It is an engineered reality born from historical circumstance rather than biological imperative.
It completely reorients how we use the word natural. We constantly hear societal norms justified as being, just the natural order of things.
All the time.
Yet here is Thomas Hobbes, the philosopher who believed in the absolute, terrifying power of the state to compel obedience, looking at the traditional patriarchal family and declaring that there is absolutely nothing natural about it.
Right. It is a legal arrangement drafted by humans.
Yeah.
And this aligns perfectly with his overarching metaphor of the Leviathan itself. The state, the commonwealth, is an artificial man. It is a machine we built to escape the horrors of the state of nature. For Hobbes, almost everything that provides stability, justice, property rights, and domestic authority is artificial.
It is human artifice. It was built. And the profound implication of acknowledging that a structure was built by human hands is the realization that it could have been built differently.
Exactly. If the historical variables had been altered, if mothers had been the ones to erect the first commonwealths and draft the initial civil codes, the laws of society would favor the mothers.
The entire edifice of male dominance is reduced to a historical accident regarding who held the pen when the first civil contracts were drafted.
Yeah. It strips the mystique away entirely, leaving only power, survival, and the agreements we make with one another.
Well, we've journeyed through a surprisingly radical corner of a famously conservative text today.
We really have.
We've examined Hobbes' assertion that men and women face each other as equal, lethal threats in the state of nature, totally devoid of any natural hierarchy.
Right. And we analyzed his brutal logic that mothers hold the original absolute dominion over human life simply through their physical power to either nourish or expose an infant.
Right, proving that all authority originates from the power of preservation.
And we unpacked his conclusion that the patriarchal structures dominating human history are artificial legal constructs, established by men who wrote the laws to favor themselves when transitioning into civil society.
So the next time you find yourself listening to an argument about traditional or natural gender roles, keep this deep dive in mind. Remember that even the ultimate architect of absolute political authority, writing way back in the middle of the 17th century, recognized those roles not as biological destinies, but as man-made artificial structures.
Because recognizing the artificial nature of these structures is really the first step in understanding how power actually operates in our daily lives.
Exactly. Which leaves you with a final, lingering thought to explore long after we wrap up today. If the foundational societal structure of male dominance was literally written into civil law simply because men were the ones holding the pen at the dawn of the Commonwealth, what other deeply ingrained, supposedly natural dynamics in our modern families, our corporate workplaces, or our political institutions are actually just centuries-old contracts? And more importantly, if they're merely contracts we have forgotten we wrote, don't we possess the inherent power to rewrite them?